Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Dr. Dilsora Fozilova, and in today's lecture, we will continue our discussion on fear and social anxieties, and we will be focusing on the deliberate creation of fear in Stalinism today. So in our last class, I lectured on the Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism, and I told you that although we have Stalinism in last week's outline, the course outline, I started with Hannah Arendt to make sure that you understand the fundamental part of fundamental elements of the totalitarian governments through Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism. So in today's class, we will continue that discussion by focusing on Stalinism. And the discussion of totalitarian government will be less today, but we will be seeing or comparing in the actual world how it looked like, how totalitarian government or governance looked like in Stalinist Russia. So with that, let's start. Let me share my PowerPoint and we will go from there. Here you go. Deliberate creation of fear in Stalinism. And we will be discussing or asking the question of what is Stalinism and rise and fall of Stalin, terror and fear in Stalinism, colonizing Central Asia, and totalitarian rule under Stalin. So that are our main focuses. So who is Stalin? Joseph Stalin was born in 1878 and died in 1953. He was a Georgian revolutionary and politician. He had a very harsh childhood. And also when in his adult life, he went through some hardships in having a relationship with people in his life. He went through very scarring to marriages, and he was very devoted to Marxism. If you know some knowledge about Marxism, Marxism wasn't that popular in his the Marxist time, but it became very popular because it was used as an ideology in the Soviet Union. So it was about like building socialism and then which should lead society to communism. They never got there, but that was like a Marxism-Leninism ideology used for building a political system. So he was a Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. He was one of the activists there. And between 1899 to 1904, he was a very active member of that party. He organized labor strikes, and he also co-edited a newspaper that was Proletarian Struggle, and that was in Proletarianism Zola, and just in English, it's Proletarian Struggle. So Stalin was known as a man of steel because he was very tough. And that he, although there are all different kinds of assumptions about Stalin, certainly he portrayed himself as a tough man. And some of the historians argue that he was very scared to lose control and power. That's why he became violent in society. But however, he was known as a man of steel. So in 1905, Stalin first time met Lenin. Lenin was very popular politician at that time. Actually, in the Soviet Union, I was born in the Soviet Union, and then there was like all the little small kids called Oktyabriat, and then they had a pen they had to wear, and in the middle of the pen there was a head of Lenin. They were very proud of this guy, and it was just like idealized figure in the Soviet Union. So he meets Lenin in 1905, and then he rises to Central Committee and editorship of Pravda. Pravda was one of the biggest famous newspapers in the Soviet Union, and he works there in 1912 and 1917. And then in 1917, there was a Russian Revolution, and Tsar Nicholas II abdicated to escape being violently overthrown. Lenin became a leader at the time in 1917, and then that was first step towards the Soviet Union. The Stalin was one of the four governing people in the Leninist Soviet Union, and in 1921 and 1924 was that was Lenin was sick, and that was his final years. At that time, between 1917 and 1924, the Soviet Union was moving towards bettering itself, that so many good things happened at that time. And then the 1924, Stalin came to power, and he was there way too long and died in 53. So now let's see what happened between his lifetime. So as someone who was born in the Soviet Union, for me, it's just a common knowledge. We study Stalin in school, and we had a different kind of view on Stalinism as growing up in the Soviet Union. The things he has done was basically hidden. The people did not talk too much about it, or history was rewritten by historians. However, though, it is with today's knowledge, with today's information, we can now understand how totalitarian that government was between 1924 to until Stalin died. And he was assassinating many people with fabricated evidence, and he tried to manipulate the younger politicians, and they were saying, like, whoever does not listen to him or opposes him, he would just shoot them. He would just clean the whole political arena, so there's no opposition rises for him. There are 35,000 officers, the history says, that were shot or imprisoned with the accusation of serving his opponent Trotsky. And there's a conversation about the Stalin was very concerned about Trotsky because he was also a very powerful man, and because of that, he was whoever's serving Trotsky, he was just killing them. During the Soviet Union, it was similar to the Nazis' propaganda. People were required to inform about any such suspicions in society. For example, if the neighbor says something, or there's a gathering in the village or town or whatever, people get together and somebody says something that can be used as a clue that they are opposing to the government. Therefore, somebody would inform KGB, and then in the middle of the night, there was a car, I think they called it Nighthawk or something, and the car would come and pick up those people who were the oppositions to the government. And there was a few purges during the Stalinist Russia in society. I will discuss that further when I'm talking about the Central Asia. However, there are between 1937 and 39, an average of 1,500 people were killed daily and every day. So 700,000 were executed. So who's Stalin? And what is Stalinism? There is another question. And let me read this here. Stalinism is the most precise word used to describe The ideology and the policies adopted by Stalin based on centralization, totalitarianism, and the pursuit of communism. So this Stalinism is not only what Stalin have done, but it is the ideology. That ideology was Leninism, Marxism, that pursuit of communism, from just moving from socialism to communism. That was an ideology, or the ideology of the Soviet government. And then also policies he adopted, and also how he used these policies. And there was many things that wasn't in the books of law what he had done. All of this work he had done, actions he did, and the centralization of the system. The politics was based on the centralized government. There shouldn't be any private wealth, and the wealth should be the government's wealth, and then people can work and get paid. So by doing so, they tried to create somehow equal society in the Soviet Union. It was based on the Marxist idea of the government, or the wealth of society should not be the wealth of bourgeois. The government should hold the wealth, and then the people, the society should get more than what bourgeois would give to workers. So based on that idea, the Soviet Union started to centralize all the wealth of the country. So Stalinism is the means of power, laws, and regulations which were implemented in the Soviet Union between 1927 and 1953 by Joseph Stalin. So this is what Stalinism is. Everything that in that time, the ideology, the use of power and violence to pursue the ideas and ideology in society, and the policies adopted, laws and regulations, and also actions have been done by Stalin, is the Stalinism. So what was the motivation behind the deliberate creation of terror in society? We learned from Hannah Arendt's book that the casual use of violence and terror was used to control society in Nazi Germany. So the motivation behind the deliberate creation of terror in society by Joseph Stalin was very similar to that. The violence of the late 1930s was driven by fear, which Stalin was afraid that the opposition will take his government. Also, there were the countries, the Stalin thought they want to take the Soviet Union. For example, he feared from attacks from Japan, France, and United Kingdom, Poland, and Romania. So that was mainly what kind of fear the Stalin had. Certain workers and peasants he was scared of also, because he thought if these workers and peasants have the wealth, they will try to overthrow him from the government. They can, kind of unite people and somehow fight against him, because he knew that these people had reason to resent the regime, because their wealth was taken away from them to give back to the centralized government, so they should not have any wealth. And then the centralized government will give to workers, pay workers for their labor. So people who lost their wealth, Stalin thought they resent him, they hate him, they don't like him, they try to overthrow his government. Therefore, before these people did anything, the Stalin took them and threw in a jails. They got kulaks. They created the concentration camps or labor camps, and throw these people in those places. So there was quite a bit of fear involved in his how he did politics. And he was also very ambitious with his plans, and then he did not wanted nothing to come between him and how to achieve these overambitious goals. So there was, in his ruling in the Soviet Union, of course, people who worked around him feared so much that he could casually kill anybody in order to kill people left and right every single day. Many people were killed in Russia. However, that wasn't the end. He created that 15 republics were created in the Soviet Union. It started with invading certain countries in the former Soviet Union. So the invasion of Central Asia was an example to that. So the Central Asia, called Russian Turkestan at some point. Before that, it was Turkestan. So people in the Soviet Union speak in Turkish languages, the language group, that they are like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan. These 5 republics were created during in the beginning of the Soviet Union in 1924. So some historians say that there was no force from Russia to call them Istan, like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. It was just internal, how people decided to do that. However, the Soviet Union, Russians came and took over Central Asia, and they used their ideology to restructure society in Central Asia as well. Central Asia is these 5 republics, they are Muslim countries. Therefore, there was an attack to their culture and religion when the Soviet Russia took over Central Asia. So these people were, in the history books, these people in the Central Asia were portrayed as barbarian, and they didn't know how to, they weren't literate, and also they did not have a good culture. Like any colonizers used the excuses in other places, like in Canada, other places, that they were like barbarian culture, they needed help. That's how Soviet Union or the Russians portrayed Central Asian people. When they invaded Central Asia, there was 2 huge purges in 1920s and 1930s. The first purge was in 1920s, in 1927, starting at the time, and all these people who opposed to the Soviet Union, people who fought not give up their religion, culture, or they didn't want to give up the country to Soviet Union, they were just taken away, killed, or just thrown into Siberia in these labor camps. They wanted a utopian transformation in society. In sociology, we know that when the changes are rapid and people cannot make adaptations to the new changes, therefore there will be disorder in society. And the people, for example, fundamentalist Muslims in society, they killed their own wives and daughters. At a time, whoever took that head cover, they had something called paranje, and they, with the force, with the pressure of the Soviet Union, women had to take the cover they had over their head, and therefore men in this society was not agree. They couldn't adapt to it, adapt to that, and therefore many thousands of women were killed by their own relatives or husbands or fathers. And when we think about that coming and invading to the Central Asia, closing down the mosques and turning them into warehouses, burning all the books they had, Quran or Hadith or other books, that the religious books, and they're not allowing people to practice their religion. And they practiced scientific atheism, which is against religion. It just does not accept any religion and connects the creation story to Darwinism. So that's scientific atheism. So because of that scientific atheism, that any religion was declared as, it's just a lie, that, religion, from the Marxism, we know Marx said that religion was used to suppress people. So that idea was taken from Marx and then applied to this, the Communist Party's ideology. Therefore, no religion was allowed in the Soviet Union. So this was basically the cultural genocide in Central Asia. Also, there was not only cultural genocide, actual people were killed in daily basis. Purges and executions, and I told you that first purge was in 1920s, and then 1930s, 1937 and onward, there were another layer of purge. Whoever left from the first purge was taken away and killed in the second purge. Stalin ordered widespread purges, executions, and imprisonments, creating a climate of fear and uncertainty. Of course, when society sees this kind of treatment, this kind of violence, they are terrorized. They are very concerned about their well-being, their children's well-being, their close people's well-being. They try to they walk on the eggshell to not to make any mistakes in society. And that is the fear climate created by Stalin. And the secret police, that KGB, was also laid another layer on top of that. And then a lot of violence was done through the secret police. And many people in society were their informants. That, for example, I can spy on my neighbor while my neighbor will spy on me. That means I am the informant and my neighbor is the informant. If one of us do some mistakes or say something against the government, they will know that. And then one of us will go, right? So that was the kind of fear created in society. And earlier I mentioned about this, special car came and picked up people at night. And that was also the car coming at night and picking up your neighbor, and next morning people get up and somebody from that community is gone. That creates so much fear. And every night when people go to bed, perhaps they would be thinking that if they will come out of this door in the morning, or they will be gone at night. It's such a deep sense of terror in society every single person experienced. To understand it, to understand the amount or degree of fear, you have to just read and reflect on the historical information, how people were treated in society. So also people who were taken away from society, not all of them killed, and many of them sent to gulags. Gulags were labor camps, and they were there are so many gulags in Siberia, the coldest place in the Soviet Union, in the former Soviet Union. The forced labor camps, gulags, were used to imprison and terrorize perceived enemies of the regime. So if I say something and my neighbor tells that to the government, I was perceived as an enemy to the government. So they could send me to this concentration of the labor camps. And another very similar thing between the concentration camps and the labor camps is that how they looked like that. Many massively people lived in the large, rooms. They didn't have privacy. They didn't have, they didn't have any freedom. The food and the clothes they wear, the numbers they had, they didn't call by their names, but by their numbers. This, all of them was similar between concentration camps in Nazi Germany and also the gulags in Stalinist Soviet Russia. The gulags existed between 1918 to 1991, actually recently, when the republics, 15 republics of the Soviet Union became independent republics. That's when the gulags ended. And between 1929 and 1953, the Stalinist rule in the Soviet Union, 27.8 million people were killed, according to the book called Gulag. The Gulag history, she's a historian. Her name is Anne Applebaum, and she is the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction, Britain's Duff Cooper Prize she received also, and her books were recognized as a National Book Award. The book was finalist for the National Book Award, and there's so many other awards that book received actually. And in her book, she talks about labor and concentration camps in the Soviet Union, and she does a very good job providing what it meant to be there. And she talks about that they created as a jail in 1918, the oppositions of the Soviet Union after the revolution in 1917 was sent there. First, it was used like a jail. After Stalin came to power in 1927, Gulag became the terror and concentration camps. And also she calls it that grave for Stalin's power struggle. So in 1930s, end of 1920s and 30s, because of his power struggle, he sent way too many people to gulags. Another similarity between what Hannah Arendt was talking about in Nazi Germany and the Stalinist Russia was censorship and propaganda. Actually, Hannah Arendt reflects on both, but more discusses the Nazi Germany. Control of media, information created a culture of fear where dissenting voices were silenced, so nobody could say without the government putting censor, or government going through the information. All the information was controlled in the Soviet Union, and that's same in the Nazi Germany. Random arrests and disappearances. We talked about casual use of violence in the Nazi Germany, and this is also the casual use of violence in the Soviet Union. People were taken away without warning, creating sense of constant fear and uncertainty in society. The disappearances actually continued even after the independence of these republics in the Soviet Union. So public trials and show trials, this was horrible, that they brought out people from the villages and took them to open places and just shoot them there, and they left the bodies in that place. When I was conducting interviews in Uzbekistan, I had a conversation with one woman, and she talked about that she lived in certain place in Uzbekistan, and she said there was a bridge, and our parents never wanted us to go through that bridge because they said there is an evil in there, and then summertime, she said it was such a bad smell would come when breeze comes from that side. So because they took people out there and killed them and left their bodies openly on the ground, and in summer times that probably smelled so bad, and that's what people were smelling. And adult men knew what was happening over there. Nobody wanted kids to go there, or they just didn't want children to see any of those horrifying things. And these public trials were very common in the Soviet Union, in the Stalinist Soviet Union, and show trials were used to demonstrate the consequences of dissent and opposition. So when people see that people were brought out and killed in front of their eyes, and that of course causes so much fear, and people will be scared of saying anything, doing anything, or being opposition to the government. So now I think you have good idea about how much fear involved in Stalinist Russia, and decolonization and collectivization. That is because of this Marxist ideology that the wealth had to be taken away from wealthy farmers, which was so unfair because they had the land and they had a lot of, for example, wheat or other things. Because the Russia came and they were taking them away, these wealthy farmers burned their products, and which led to famine in the Soviet Union. People did not have food to eat. It was too rapid, too inconsiderate kind of politics in Stalinist Russia. That you can see now, it's not only political fear or the fear from violence or bad laws. There was also fear from famine and not being able to having food on the table for the family's table. That was another layer of fear in society. So there is Adib Khaled is one of the scholars who wrote about Central Asia, and he was actually in my dissertation committee when I did my research. So I really enjoyed and used his books for while doing my research. So he talks about the politics of Muslim cultural reform. He talks that in the beginning of when the Soviet Union invaded Central Asia, the idea was just building a culture or building a new modernized society based on their own culture and religion, which was not allowed by the Soviet Union. Instead, all of these Muslim reformers were taken away from society and purged in 1920s and 1930s. So he writes a book called Jadidism in Central Asia, The Politics of Muslim Cultural Reform. Very good book. If you're interested with Central Asian history, politics, or culture, you can certainly read Adib Khaled's books. And then there is another book written by Marianne Kemp. She is scholar from the United States. She also actually, the Adib Khaled and Marianne Kemp, both of them are from the Carleton College in the USA. I went and met actually Marian Camp in one of the conferences. So her book is called New Women in Uzbekistan. Why did I bring this up? So she writes about Soviet Union kind of de-revealing women in Central Asia. As a result, many women were killed by their fundamentals husbands and brothers or fathers. So that was kind of, she has a similar argument with Adib Khalid, talking about cultural genocide, what is to be a Muslim in secularized Soviet Union, and then women were actually caught in the middle between the Soviet Union, the Soviet government, and their fundamentals, men in society. Then the Great Terror. Every morning, the neighbors would ask, "So who's been taken away last night?" The word is black crow. That's what I meant by that car, actually. Black crow were on everyone's lips. That referred to the car that came in the depth of the night to arrest people. That's what she writes about. Fear enveloped everyone. No one could say anything openly. People were vigilant so that nobody would report on them. The fear was so great that it's still in our blood to this day. So theorizing fear in Stalinism. We learned from the Hannah Arendt's book that totalitarianism is has the elements no other governments in the world had before. Although the elements of totalitarianism existed, some of them, all these elements together, which makes totalitarian government, did not exist before Nazi Germany and the Stalinist Russia. Therefore, when we learn Stalinist Russia, we can say that totalitarianism is a political system characterized by absolute state control over all aspects of society, which Hannah Arendt also says the same thing. Under Stalin, the Soviet state exercised extensive surveillance, censorship, and repression to maintain power. This included the establishment of secret police, such as the KGB, or they call the NKVD, and vast network of informants, creating an environment where individuals feared expressing any criticism towards the government. So Stalin cultivated a cult of personality. Cultivated a cult of personality, presenting himself as an infallible leader and the embodiment of the Soviet state. So in the totalitarian regime, the propaganda plays a great role in society to control over people's minds and lives. So Stalin also used the propaganda to demonize perceived enemies of the regime. So they were like the enemies of the regime. For example, that Muslim reformers in the Soviet Union were declared as enemies of the nation or state, fostering a climate of loyalty and fear among the populace. This propaganda machinery manipulated collective emotion, creating a sense of national unity through fear and external and internal threats. When those people, that Muslim reformers, were declared as enemies of the state, and there's all different kinds of information, portraying them as an enemy, people start to believe in the information, because if this person is from the next village, maybe people will know him. But if this person's from somewhere else and all the information we get is the information attached to this name, we don't know that person. Therefore, they were portrayed as enemies, and therefore punishing them, killing them, sending them to kulaks were justified. It's very similar to the Nazi Germany. So another thing, when we think about still theorizing Stalinism, we have to think about these purges. The purges are a little bit different than what it was in Nazi Germany. Although Nazi Germany also used concentration camps and gas chambers to get rid of thousands and thousands of people, the purges and repression in the Soviet Union took a little bit different kind of form. There was like a widespread taking away people once and just, letting people be for a little bit and then taking them away again. Fear during Stalinism was reinforced through mechanisms of social control and surveillance at both in macro and micro levels. Like there was mass surveillance. Everybody spied on somebody. And therefore, like nobody left out of that surveillance system. The fear of being reported was so huge, people just couldn't trust anybody, which is very similar to Nazi Germany's propaganda and surveillance and the casual use of terror. Role of ideology in social control and surveillance. We know now from the Nazi Germany that anti-Semitism was used as an ideology to get rid of these Jewish people. And now in Stalinist Russia, of course, the ideology was very important. They were using Marxism, Leninism to get rid of all this farmers, for example, peasants and farmers, and taking away their wealth and sending them to gulags. And then because of that ideology, they were getting rid of all this religious people, religious Muslims and the opposition. So therefore, ideology was a very important element in the Stalinist Russia as well. The social mechanisms created by Stalinism enabled these purges, including the role of ideology, the manipulation of legal systems, and the dynamics of conformity and obedience within institutions such as Communist Party and the military. Intergenerational trauma. So now the trauma, when we talk about trauma, it's a very complex idea, the very complex concept. We have to understand that any trauma caused to society, it does not end by the end of Stalinism or the Nazi Germany. It continues in the memories of the culture or memories of people. Beyond the immediate political and social implications, therefore, there are the long-term psychological effects of living under Stalinist terror. Even today in Central Asia, people say that the intergenerational trauma still living in society, that mentality of the people, or just kind of they have that slavery mentality, or they have some sort of mentality, they don't have self-confidence, or just trust in their culture, loving their culture. They always put down or said things that portrayed them as barbarian. Therefore, they still have that mentality in society. That's argued. Understanding how fear becomes institutionalized and internalized within society is a key aspect of sociological analysis. Therefore, understanding how this fear lives in the memory of people is very important aspect of understanding intergenerational trauma in society. So after totalitarianism, Stalinism, and Nazism compared, that is the chapter you read in your readings last week. So that I kind of like sent you a quick announcement about it, what that's about. There are some repetitions intentional repetitions in that chapter, talks about Nazi Germany, and then talks about Stalin's Russia. And it seems like you're talking about the same thing, but actually they are just kind of comparing to totalitarian regimes. The chapter examines the similarities and differences in their ideologies, methods of control, and political structures. It aims to understand the nature of totalitarianism as a broader phenomenon. So I went through that chapter again after receiving some concerns, and I think when you're reading, you have to really pay attention to why this repetition was happening. Just you have to read between words, I think. So this is our final conclusion of what we talked about today. We talked about ideological foundations in the Stalinist Soviet Union, use of terror and violence in Stalinism, political structures, social engineering in propaganda. It was about social engineering is used a lot in the Soviet Union. Actually, recently, last year, I was asked to teach social engineering in one of the universities in Uzbekistan. So they still, entrusted with the idea of social engineering. What is social engineering? Social engineering is changing society with a goal or plan in mind. Just kind of making changes that leads to a certain kind of society. And then starting the socialism was actually based on the idea of social engineering. If they do the thing is right, and socialism that should lead to communism. So that was main idea about social engineering. So that was our short lecture on Stalinism. And if you have any questions, please bring to our discussion group, and I'll be very happy to answer. Have a great day.